Hey there, welcome to Authentically Raw. I'm your host, Jamie Berris.
Jennie, Ketcham, Crooks. Did I do it? The Authentically Raw podcast.
Thank you. I'm super excited to get to sit and chat with you today, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, yes. So first off, I would like to go through, just a little bit about who you are. You're a social worker. You're an author of The 30-Day Path to Digital Minimalism and Real Life Maximism. I love that title. You are also, this is what's really, really fascinating to me, an anxiety and OCD specialist and the founder of the West Coast Anxiety Clinic. So when I even mention anxiety, I feel like a lot of people's feelers get, raised because it's kind of an epidemic out there. So just throwing that out there. But I want to back up because I would like you to just elaborate a little bit more on who you are and what you do exactly.
Yeah, so I am a licensed clinical social worker, like you mentioned. I operate an online mental health practice that focuses specifically on the treatment of anxiety and OCD, West Coast Anxiety Clinic. And I came into this profession by more of a wavy, circular, sort of like a toddler scribbling. That's sort of how I got here. It was not linear. And so before I became a mental health clinician, I was actually in the adult industry, and I was on a Dr. Drew rehab show, and went back to school late in life and found my way here through a series of really beautiful, uncomfortable, anxiety-inducing changes. And, becoming an anxiety specialist has been so profoundly rewarding for me, just in terms of like the kind of people that I get to work with and the kind of changes that I get to see them do. And it also has this really beautiful way of honoring all of the changes that I've made in my own life. And so I love the work that I do. I'm extraordinarily grateful that people trust me with their hearts and their brains. And it's a cool gig.
Yeah. Could you describe more or less the characteristics that you see most, in your clients?
Yeah, you bet. So I work with people who are suffering with clinical anxiety disorders, and people who are struggling with phobias, and also people who are struggling with OCD. Trauma is sort of everywhere and walks in pretty frequently, so I won't exclude that. And it used to be considered part of the anxiety disorder spectrum, if you will. But both that and anyway, I digress. So an important distinction to make is that fear and anxiety are different things. And I'll talk a little bit about OCD as well. But before we jump into that, fear and anxiety are different things, right? Fear is the emotional response that we have when we are under threat at present, right? So you're out swimming in the ocean and you get attacked by a shark, you get attacked by a shark. That's right, because that's where the fear shows up. And so it sends you into this like fight or flight. I had this moment of like, but what if it's coming at you? That's anxiety, right? So you see the shark coming at you. That's anxiety. It's like, is this thing going to get me?
Yeah.
We don't know, because we don't know if it's actually a shark or if it's, your partner swimming with a shark fin on his back, like just messing with you, right? And so,
Right.
So anxiety is the perception of a possible threat. But fear is the emotional response of being currently under attack. And so those are really important distinctions to make, right? Because anxiety very much involves this future-oriented thinking cognitive process. Something is going to get me, and I got to prepare for that. And there is a totally functional amount of anxiety that is important for us to have, right? Like, you hang out with my 2.5-year-old. She doesn't look at the street and have this like, oh, well, that bus could definitely hit us if we dart out there right now. She doesn't have that process developed yet, right? She's stoked that there's so much going on and she's ready to go. But my anxiety is like, oh, we're going to stand back from this intersection. We're going to take a pause, right? So
Right.
there's a certain amount of functional anxiety that is present in everyone.
Yeah.
When we develop a clinical anxiety disorder, it's when we start really fighting against that process. We start to think, I shouldn't feel anxious, or we don't listen to the anxiety, right? We know that we have a presentation coming up and we procrastinate because it's too much to think about. It's so overwhelming, or we don't have enough time to do it the way that we want to do it. And suddenly, right, the anxiety gets higher and higher and higher. And if you're not listening to it, if you're fighting against it, you really start to suffer. So anxiety is very much this constellation of experiences that happens inside of us, right? It's thoughts about the future, worrying. It's physical sensations like racing heart, sweaty hands, and it's emotions, right? Like there's some fear wrapped into it. There's a little bit of dread wrapped into it. There's a little bit of like, you could really sort of like tease out a bunch of different emotions that show up in the context of anxiety. Now, OCD is actually it is also a set of behaviors that operate together to reinforce anxiety, right? And so anxiety is something that gets reinforced when we don't have an opportunity to learn about the thing that's making us anxious. So, for example, I walk up to the side of the road and I feel anxious about how close I am to the side of the road, and I take like 25 steps back. I never have an opportunity to learn, if I stand that close to the side of the road, do I get hit? Right? There is a greater chance of getting hit if I'm closer to the road. But the point is that anxiety offers, if you interfere with the experience of anxiety, then you don't have an opportunity to learn if the thing making you anxious actually happens. Right? So you're out in the ocean, you see the shark fin coming at you. If you hightail it to the beach and that shark fin goes under, you never know if it's your partner or if it's a shark. Right? And so in any sort of treatment of anxiety, we try to approach and go near it. Well, with OCD, a lot of the threats that we've identified are happening inside of us, right? So they're thoughts, we call them obsessions, right? Thoughts, images, physical sensations, even emotions that show up, right? Like any sort of thing that happens inside our human suit that we find distressing. It's usually what we call it, and it happens over and over and over. So we call it obsession. Now, a compulsion is something that we use to make that obsession go away, to make the distress go down. So if we think about it from this learning idea, compulsions interfere with your ability to learn, right? So I touch a doorknob, and this is a very sort of like archetypal OCD idea, right? In the community, I touch a doorknob, I have this intrusive thought, oh my God, I'm going to get sick, right? And I go and I wash my hands. I wash my hands compulsively, right? And I never have an opportunity to learn if touching that doorknob is the thing that gets me sick, if I keep interfering with that anxiety cycle. So in treatment for anxiety, in treatment for phobias, in treatment for OCD, what we do is we create a life that's really about approaching the stuff that freaks you out.
Yeah.
And we try to learn, is the thing that we were afraid of, did it happen? And if it did it kill us? Are we still here? Right? My malpractice insurance is stellar, BT dubs, but we create this approach plan so we can learn something. And we get to learn, did we need to avoid it? All of those safety behaviors, the compulsions, did we need all of that? Or was it just busy work? And we get to learn, can I live a full, meaningful life while I feel anxious? Is anxiety itself a threat? And usually the answer is no. Anxiety is actually 100% of the time. The answer is no. Anxiety, nobody has ever died from feeling anxious. And so that's what I do all day. I terrify people. That's what I do for a living.
And it really, to me, it sounds a lot like leaning into your fears until they're no longer fears, but it's really, kind of being curious and questioning your fears too. Reducing them. Yes, no, that's kind of what I felt like a little bit. Also, I like that doorknob reference, because how often we do things on autopilot without stopping to really question it. And I think there's a lot of security in stopping and questioning. Like you say, you terrify people all day until probably they're just not terrified anymore. But we don't want to put ourselves through that. We'd rather live with the anxiety or the compulsion, the obsessive behaviors, which is what's hurting us. It's kind of, that's really fascinating.
It's so you touch on some really important things, and I want to clarify a little bit. So early on in exposure and response prevention, which is that we're going to create a list of things that terrify you, and then we're going to go out and we're going to approach those things, and you're not going to do any of the stuff that keeps you safe. That's fundamentally what this treatment is, right? It's exposure and response prevention. Early in the literature, early in the research, the field really thought that it was about reducing fear, right? And so a lot of the goals became to stay in the exposure opportunity until somebody didn't feel afraid. But then what we ended up learning by doing that was that we had to not feel afraid in order to be successful, right? Which is just not true, right? If you've ever if you've ever jumped out of a plane, if you've ever given a presentation, if you've ever had kids, right? They start to ride a bike. I'm terrified. I'm like, oh my God, she's going to fall, right? And I can feel afraid and still shove her and let go, right? And so over the course of the past 50, 60 years, what we've come to realize is that a reduction in fear isn't actually indicative of successful treatment. The people who had reduced fear, they actually ended up coming back to treatment more. They ended up relapsing more. And in large part, it was because the exposure itself became the compulsion. I have to do this exposure to make my fear go away.
Jeez.
Yeah, right.
I got
so
a new compulsion. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Okay.
It just grabs it. OCD is so sneaky. It's like, oh, you know what we can use to make us feel better?
Yeah, there's those
Exposure
people that
response.
are into the extreme sports and jumping off cliffs. Yeah, right? I mean,
Right,
yeah. I'm
they
going
still
out there,
feel
but yeah.
afraid. They still feel a spark of fear. Although there was that his name is Alex. He did a Free Solo was the documentary. Anyway, I know that they've done brain scans on him, and he has reduced activity in his amygdala. So he literally feels less fear than the normal person, which
Wow.
makes him super successful climbing up giant rock faces without any gear, right? That's quite helpful. But what we find is actually indicative of success in treatment is that we learn to tolerate uncertainty,
Okay.
right? Are we going to be okay? I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's go. Can I walk out the house without a baby bag packed with stuff? Can I walk out with just a diaper in my hand? Can I walk out with no things at all? No diaper, no baby wipes, no change of clothes, no toys. Can I walk out with this baby with just us, and can we be okay, right? And that gives us an opportunity to learn what we're really made of. And so the exposure and response prevention, it's really about learning, what can you do?
Right.
Even when you feel afraid, even when you feel anxious? How big can you make your life? How flexible can you behave in the presence of fear? So fear is the thing that lets us know we're on the right track. And you also have to feel fear in order to act courageously.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to extinguish fear. In fact, we don't want to extinguish anxiety. we want to befriend it. We want it to be a part of our lives in a way that's meaningful and in a way that's useful and helpful to us.
And I like the term, like when you think of anxiety, it's really our perceived fears. It's like us anticipating like what could go wrong, or fear, basically. And I don't know why it just all of a sudden popped into my head. I hear a lot lately, and I feel like it's a lot of, adults, and even into middle age and beyond, it's the social anxiety. And I don't know, it just made me think of that too. Like if you say the example of leaving the house, you don't have the diaper bag or all the little things that you need for the kids or something like that, and kind of like, oh, everything was fine. What's the worst that's going to happen is, whatever sort of thing. But I hear the whole, I don't want to go because I have social anxiety or this or that. And sometimes I've even started to think in my head, I'm like, I just don't think you want to go because you're tired or you're burnt out or whatever. I mean, I think a lot of it is that, but this social anxiety stuff, I feel like so many people are labeling themselves with that. I have social anxiety. Talk to me about that or talk to people about that, because I have a feeling some ears are perking up.
Yeah. I think given the transformation in how we communicate with each other, it would not be surprising if we were seeing expanded levels of social anxiety in the general population, right? And so the way that you treat social anxiety, so maybe I'll take a step back. So we define social anxiety as a really intense fear of perceived judgment. No, we don't know if they're actually being judged. We don't know if we're actually being judged, but it's the threat of judgment, right? So an intense fear of possible judgment, and then avoidance of situations that put us in that situation, right? So I'm afraid of looking like a fool in front of my colleagues. So I really, I just end up having to go to the bathroom, ironically, every time we go around the meeting table and introduce ourselves. Like, oh, isn't that convenient, right? Like, and then I sit down and I don't have to do it. So avoidance of that opportunity to say something and say my name. Or, and I think this is what ties in with this idea of how our communication has changed. I am afraid of telling this person that I like them, right? We're starting to date. I'm afraid of telling them that I like them. And so I text it to them, right? I avoid seeing their face. I avoid being rejected, possibly. And so I do it via text because it's less scary there. Yeah. Right. And so I think there's this like really insidious thing that's happening where all of our communication is shifting onto these like beautiful shiny devices where it's so much easier to say things where we don't actually have to confront how those things are being held and responded to. Yeah. But the magic of connection is in this like synchronous real world. Here we are. Let's see. If I tell you that I'm like crushing on you super hard, do you reject me? Well, let's see. And also, can I survive being rejected? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Largely, by and large, you will survive being rejected, right? And the more you get rejected, the better you will get at being rejected. I think about, and this is, there's a lot of bias in this. I'm going to say it anyway. Forget it. I think about baseball players, right? I don't know if you ever have known any baseball players or known any, like dated any baseball players or like girls who've dated any. Baseball players get around, like love them, bless their hearts, right? But they get around. I didn't know
that about them.
They do. And it's a well-known fact. But they also have really high, like they take a lot of swings. Yeah. They go out, they have a relatively good like success rate. I mean, but a batting average, if you even think about it in terms of baseball, right? Like batting average is out of like 1,000, and a successful like MLB batting average in the like high twos is amazing. Like you're only hitting 270 balls out of 1,000 and you get to play pro, right? So like baseball players get rejected a lot. I think that translates well into them going out and they take a lot of swings at a lot of like sexy swings at a lot of partners. I'm not gonna talk about domestic violence here, but anyway, the point being that like with social anxiety, we have to go out and test these beliefs that we have about being rejected, these beliefs that we have about being judged. And so what I often do with people in treatment for social anxiety is we create a list of opportunities for them. And there are different flavors of each fear, right? And so what one person is afraid of in the context of being socially anxious is going to be different from another's. And so one person might be afraid of looking foolish. So we'll have them go out and like drop a bag of quarters in the middle of a store, right? And then they have to like clean it up. Like, can you survive that? Or we'll have them wear like a sombrero and a poncho to the park, right? Which is just like, I don't know, culturally and socially inappropriate, right? Like we're in Seattle and we just don't do that anymore, right? And so we'll test it like that. Or if you're afraid of conflict, we'll have you send back your latte. Right? You do it a lot, even though it's a good latte. It's good. There's nothing wrong with it, right? But like socially anxious people are going to want to do that, right? Like especially if it's about conflict. And so,
okay, hold on, because gosh, you just opened up like that's huge. Sending back your latte, for instance. I can't even tell you, and I think this is women more than men. I cannot tell you. I mean, I'm sure you can look at your life too, and how many times you've been out to dinner with someone or any place where you're getting service, ice cream, coffee, like anything. And it's either the wrong order, maybe it's the wrong size, or it's just something's up with it. And people are too afraid to say anything. They don't want to come across as rude or impolite, or they don't know what, they don't want to upset people or ruffle feathers. And I'm like, because I was trapped in that boat for a long time. I'm so glad I'm not anymore, because now I think I look at it with complete different perspective. That, number one, it's how you handle the situation. You don't need to attack the other person. It's how we
don't be a jerk.
Yeah. But I think that it's that perceived fear of what's going to happen if I say, you actually gave me the wrong meal. Or, but it's okay, it's fine. Well, it's not fine because you're talking about it, or it's you wanted your steak well and it's bleeding, but your perceived fear of what that person is going to do, what spit on it, maybe you probably wouldn't know anyway, and there's worse that happens back in that kitchen that you have no idea of, or what that server's going to be mad at you. Okay, well, you'll probably never see them again. Like you said, is it going to kill you? Is it really going to? But we make this stuff, it's minor stuff in life, but we make it so major that it's like the becoming, it's a little thing, but it's all these little things like that add up to then we are just, I deal with anxiety, or I have anxiety, or everything causes me anxiety. And we're so focused on it that, it does. And just the way people look at us or what they say or things that happen, it's like we're expecting it. And earlier when you were talking, it was one of the little scenarios, and it made me think of how we replace fun with fear. Like, you're being out in the ocean and, not that we should, this is fun, there's an actual shark here. But whether it's social anxiety or, anxiety in the workplace or at home or just your daily life all day long, like how that perceived fear, I used fun just because it, the replace that with it, but like the joy and the just peace, and instead we live with this like inner, it's not peaceful, walk around with anxiety for one, but not that you can get rid of all of it. I'm rambling because I'm thinking of so many little things that you said, and then you can go on from there, because I do want to wrap it back around to, because it stuck out in my mind. You mentioned functional anxiety, and it reminds me a little bit about stress. We all want to have a stress-free life, and I see things about that. Well, that's a terrible way to live, because there's a certain little part of stress that's really good for us. It motivates us in life. If we didn't have any stress, we'd all just like be zombies. So my question would be is, maybe describe functional anxiety and how, like, what's a healthy way to function with a good, healthy level of anxiety, and not let, say, our fear, this perceived fear, kind of, it really does. It can take over your life, and it can really, I guess, I don't know, I don't like the word hinder, but it like holds us back from living like a full life that we would want. You know what I mean? Like, we're holding ourselves back, and it's just it's not healthy. It's not fun. It's not necessary. So speak on some of that stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up fun in the context of anxiety, in the context of fear, and I want to touch on stress a little bit too. I think that's really a beautiful thing. So I think of it a little bit like a bunny in a field, right? And bunnies they're tasty for a lot of animals, right? There's like lots of threats in this world if you're a bunny. Yeah. And yet a bunny can lay there and sort of like enjoy the dandelions and be open to the wind and like see the sky, and they can just be bunnies, right? But the second that a threat shows up, functionally, fear has this narrowing effect on their attention, right? And suddenly, the only thing that exists in the world is this like the hiding spot, right? And so everything goes about getting to the hiding spot. And the dandelions go away, the soft breeze goes away. It's just the bunny and getting to this hiding spot. And there's a researcher, Kelly Wilson, who talks about this a lot. And the same thing happens with us, right? So we're out in the ocean. If you're attending only to the possibility of a threat, you miss the waves. You miss your kids playing on the beach. You miss somebody splashing you. And the second that a little bit of seaweed brushes up against you, I'm right, yeah, back to the beach, right? Like, get to the hidey hole immediately, right? And so it is really difficult to broaden our attention when we are experiencing a tremendous amount of fear, right? And so this is a lot of what we work on in treatment for anxiety is, can I do something that's scary and attend flexibly to other things that are in my life? Right? And not to get away from the thing that's scary, but can I hold all of this in my awareness at the same time? Right? And so that's what we do there. With stress is this really interesting thing that you're right. There is this popular idea that says we should eliminate all stress in our lives. We should never be triggered, right? We should never feel stressed. I shouldn't feel anxious. It all sort of like gets wrapped around in this idea that these are negative things, right? Things that are not good for us, right? But what we saw, I think it was the biosphere, was this like experiment out in the desert, right? Where like we built this huge bubble, and then we put we were like, can we live on Mars? I don't know if you remember this. I'm sort of like dating myself, right? But whatever, it's fine. I'm a grown up. I'm here for it, right? Like, I made it to 40, like everybody's I'm stoked about that. But what we saw is that the trees inside of these domes, they just fell over. They grew to a certain height, and because they didn't have any wind to stress them, they couldn't stand up, right? And so what we learn when we have stress in our lives, and a functional amount of stress, right? But like what we get to learn is what we're made of, right? Like that's where this like resiliency and this grit comes from. Those trees didn't get hit by wind, so they didn't have an opportunity to reach their roots down lower and to grab on tighter. Yeah. And the same thing happens for humans. Now, there is too much stress. Yeah. Right? And some of that might be created just because you're anxious. I know for me, I can fall prey to, like I have this core belief, like many of us, that I'm not doing good enough, right? Like I'm not doing good enough. And when that belief is really big and in my face, and when that is pushing me around, I am way more likely to say yes to stuff, right? And so one of the parents in the PTA person just asked me to participate in PTA, like wants me on the board for PTA, wants me to do like the roller skating thing. And like, I want to do that. And also I see a full client load. I'm running a business. I also want time with my kids. And I'm like, well, this can be time with your, that like, this is going to like make you good enough. Like then you will be, and it's like, Jennie. And so I know that if I had said yes to that, it would have been an additional gust of wind in my life, right? And my life can be very windy. And I love it. I'm open to the winds. I'm open to weather systems, right? And I don't need to say yes to things for fear. And when I do, I often create storms, right? Like that is a storm. That is not just the Santa Anas blowing through like this, these warm gusts that let me dig deeper and let me be a palm tree. Like that is like, I don't know, a hurricane status. Things are going to be broken and like we're going to fall apart. And so I said no. I said thank you. I said no very graciously, but my own like fear of judgment, my own desire to be liked and to be well regarded, that sort of stuff can bully me around too. So there's a lot in that.
But and I mean, there's that. I think it's that perceived fear of what will they think? Am I doing enough for the school? Am I being enough here? Am I being enough there? Like, you spoke to the choir for, my kids range from 22 down to 11. And I have really, really changed how I show up in the classroom. In fact, my joke now is, so my youngest is in 5th grade and I'm like, donate list only, please. I'm not playing the party. I'm not playing the game. I'm not heading up anything. But I will donate you whatever you need. You just let me know, and I will put it on.
It's in the cart.
I'll click it, and it'll show up at the school. Right? No, I mean, but I think all joking aside, I will say, talk about severe anxiety off the charts. Personally, for me, for eons, for years, of exactly what you were speaking about. I was like, so I, would have that anxiety over saying no. There was a good chunk of probably 10 years that I was predominantly a stay-at-home mom. And I always, it's terrible because it's like, I would even say this to myself, like, well, of course you should be able to do all that. Even though you've got, 4 kids, a house to run, you're doing all of these other things that, you're involved in and stuff. And I should be the one that does that stuff. How dare I say no? And I see now, obviously, how, number one, ridiculous it is, but I see where it comes from, and I see how we adopt this stuff in all areas of our lives. And it's like, until we can, I think, you used, that resilience, you said, it was just building resilience, but saying no. And I don't know, I really truly believe that saying no, and I don't even necessarily want to get fixed on saying no. It's what I'm saying yes to, because this is a big one, actually. This area is something currently I'm working on with a couple clients right now, and it's just like with our own boundaries and things like that, because our lack of boundaries, I think, creates so much anxiety in our lives. But it's not, boundaries aren't about everything we're saying no to. It's about what we're saying yes to. And for you, you're saying yes to more family time, for really nurturing your clients, for really having that time and the energy that you need for yourself, your family, and what's it going to take to enjoy life. And so that is what you're saying yes to. And until we can kind of like make that switch, I think you can get stuck in the anxiety, but making that switch of just, if it's actually, saying the no thank you, but the resilience gets built of every time you do that without having to justify or make excuses or then feel guilty afterwards or beat yourself up or, gosh, I probably could have, or the word I should have, with all of that. And it's crazy. I think, I did know that I was building some resilience, but as you were even speaking, I'm like, wow, that's what I was doing for so long. One other thing I wanted to talk on was when you were talking about, being out in the water, like, the seaweed brushes up against you and you freak out like it's the shark or whatever. And this is another thing I think that, a topic that comes up a lot is it's basically living a life being reactive. And I love explaining the difference to people, clients, just whoever, because I'm constantly reinforcing it to myself, any advice or anything. It's really like, okay, I need this today too, but it is the difference between reacting and responding. Because when I look back in the times that, I really, truly, and I've admitted this before on the podcast, that I was dealing with like severe anxiety. I was just reactive. I was reacting to my world. I was reacting to people, reacting to I was just living in this reactive mode. I wasn't responding. And now if I can even just in the moment when I feel like the anxiety building, just take a breath and be like, you're reacting. How do you want to respond? That right there is like that one step forward that already starts to bring that like that peace or whatever, because I think it brings you back to, for me personally, it brings me back to like, okay, I have control over this. Like I can choose to respond. I don't need to live in this reactive mode, because living in that anxiety and in that reactive mode is so, it's not just harmful for like our mental and an emotional health, but physically.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. It's depleting. It's draining. But it is, I don't think people really understand too how hard it is on your heart, like your blood pressure. People deal with more chronic illnesses because your body is under so much stress all the time. And there was something I listened to years ago that was about, our anxiety, and how for the first time in like decades, with all our advanced, medicine and things like that, that like we're dying younger for one, but if we were to be tested, our biological age compared to our chronological age, the chronological age is the age of our body inside versus our real number age. It is, I'm 49 right now. So if I were to get tested and I'm living in this constant anxiety, would my insides test me at a 75-year-old?
Yeah.
And the scary thing about that is I think it's hitting people younger and younger. And when I say people, it's even, it's our kids. Like I can't, that's scary that it's hitting our kids so much younger, which ties me back around to your book and the social media part of it. And I wanted to, because I liked this, I love the title of the book, The 30-Day, I have to get my readers on. You say the 30-Day Path to Digital Minimalism and Real Life Maximism, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the thing about that, number one, I was like, ooh, 30 days. That's awesome. So that, and coming from you, a specialist on all of this, I was like, yeah, it can be done. So tell me a little bit about the book. And I know that you have also, you quote in there a little bit, because I too read the majority of the book, The Anxious Generation. Correct. And I know it centers a lot on like kids and how we parent and things like that, but it doesn't matter where you are in life. It doesn't matter if you have kids or don't have kids or have grown kids or whatever. I think it's very helpful for us all to really think about and apply to our own lives. So I would like you to just take it away on that side of things, because
Yeah.
it's sad to watch our kids in the anxiety
Yeah.
that's happening with social media.
Yeah. So I want to touch on like a beautiful process that you detailed for us, and then I'll jump in to talk about Look Up, the book.
Okay.
And so what you went through in talking about responding versus reacting, right? What I hear you doing is there are all of these really important behavioral processes, these that when we become rigid in these behavioral processes, we experience higher levels of psychopathology. Our mental health decreases as our rigidity increases, right? So flexibility is really everything. And so you made a comment about like, you start to feel anxious. You're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're just sort of like reacting here. How do I want to move forward, right? And that's such a skillful series of things. And I just want to put my finger on each one, right? And so there's that first component, that first process where you are paying attention to what is happening in the moment. It's this moment of mindfulness where you're like, whoa, we are awash with anxiety. Anxiety is here right now. And then there was a pause. And there's a little bit of spaciousness in that pause, right? And we call that a choice point, because in that space, you have the ability to choose how to respond, right? So if you're just getting bullied around by anxiety, you're just going to respond the way that like panicked, fearful things respond, right? Which is to like GTFO, like we're going to go. And so in the choice point, we have an opportunity to choose who we want to be and what we want to move toward, right? Like, how do I want to show up? What is most important to me in this moment, right? Is it appeasing this person that I think is going to judge me and avoiding their judgment? Or is it like, do I get to choose being a parent who spends time with their kids? That's a values clarification thing, right? Like, what is actually important to me? So you notice that you feel anxious. Okay, great. We don't have to avoid being anxious. There's this experiential acceptance component to it, right? So you're aware, you're accepting, you're open to feeling this way, and you are clear on what your values are. This is where I want to go. And then you choose that. You commit to act that way. So everything that you just described is such a beautiful and skillful example of flexibility, of psychological flexibility. You really touch on all of it. So what the book is designed to do, so it's Look Up, it's the 30-day path to digital minimalism and real life maximism. And what it's designed to do is to help you improve your flexibility, right? Your psychological flexibility. And so I formatted it in this like idea of a 30-day challenge. Because one, I think we all love challenges and like some sort of like set amount of days. So to disclose, there's actually nothing magic about 30 days, right? Like there's no, I didn't base that on any literature, right? Like what I base that on is the sort of like the societal standard that says like a month exists, and a month seems like we have agreed to this calendar and this idea of months, and 30 days is a familiar thing. And so we can commit to this thing for a month. And so the whole first week is about coming off of autopilot. It's really cultivating that present moment awareness. Like, what am I doing right now? How many times do I pick this thing up? What am I feeling when I pick this thing up, right? And then the whole second week is about starting to identify some of the thoughts that you have about your phone, about what you need from it, about how you have to respond to it, looking at your shoulds, right? And really starting to identify, are there these narratives in my head that are really rigidly guiding my behavior? Or can I behave a little bit more flexibly, right? The third week is about emotions, because we are responding creatures, right? Like we are emotional creatures. There's stuff going on in there, right? And chances are, if we don't have a lot of awareness around our emotional experience, we're going to get bullied around by our emotional experience.
Yeah.
And so the third week is really about identifying the emotions that are happening inside of you and also starting to notice the things that you're missing by using your phone in the way that you do. And then the fourth week and the wrap up is all about values and you living the kind of life that you want to live. So the month is all about promoting psychological flexibility. And it's not a month without your phone, so you can let go of that idea, right? There's a gradual decrease in the hours that you use, but initially you decide when you're not going to use it. And then you transition into a period of deciding when you're going to use it, right? So that idea you were mentioning earlier, like, I'm not actually saying no to this. I'm saying yes to this, right? So when will you say yes to using your phone? You know, Jonathan Haidt's book, Anxious Generation, so brilliant, terrifying, alarming, right? And he lays out some great guidelines for us as parents, as policymakers, as people who live in a community with technology, right? And a lot of the guidelines that he lays out are great. I agree. Don't give your kids phones until they're 14. Don't give them social media, right? Like the social media is detrimental on our kids' health. And I think there's an important question that he didn't attend to, and he's not a clinical psychologist, so it doesn't surprise me that this didn't get attended to, right? How are we going to do that as a society if our own behavior does not reflect the kind of behavior that we want to teach, right? Like it is one thing to say don't smoke cigarettes, but if we do that with a cigarette in our hand, then there's just that's like a pretty conflicting message, right? And so like if we take a step back and we really think, okay, like if I want my kid to learn how to be with this thing that is in our lives, right? Social media is in our lives, smartphones, tablets, they are in our lives. If I want my kids to learn how to be with these things, how am I with these things? Right? So that's that coming off of autopilot component. What beliefs do I have about how I have to have these things? That's that second week, right? Like, what does it feel like if I don't respond to somebody immediately? If I just left them on red, right? Like, what does that feel like?
I know.
Can I tolerate the possibility that I'm in this dance mommies group, they're glorious, I love them, but can I tolerate the possibility that they judge me if I don't respond with something clever right away, right? And then what is our life about, right? So we really get to model this kind of behavior for our kids, and that's going to be a huge, huge influencing factor in how they start to use phones, because it's not going to be sufficient just to take it away from them or to prevent them from getting it, right? Because we're still doing all the same stuff. The phone is equally compelling and addictive for us. And so this can really help you change your behavior and can open the door to you teaching your kids how to have a healthier relationship with their devices.
Right. You know, and I think too that adults have just as much FOMO as kids. And I personally, I'll be honest, I don't struggle in that area. And I think it's because I think personalities play out a lot in it too. Like I don't know. I mean, I've always enjoyed spending time alone. I don't always need to be at everything. And there are things, if anything, it was always harder for me to decline, and I would be left then with that feeling guilty, like, the shoulds, I should be there. I wasn't, and I've gotten past that, and gosh, talk about freedom. But I feel like there are, as adults, it's that, are you out for dinner? Are you at this gathering? Are you doing this experience, this vacation? Like, are we starting to schedule our lives for the photo op? And this isn't just kids. I mean, this is grown adults It's like this almost pre-plotting of where am I going to go? How am I going to get the best angle? I mean, it's fall. It's September here. And, you know, the apple orchards around Michigan, you know, are opening up. And the fall thing to do is to go get the pumpkins, you know, the apples, go for the hay rides, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I'm just using this because this is like what's going on right now. But I sometimes feel that it is, sure, the outing for the fun, the family is there, but there is so much focus on make sure we all have like you know, I got to make sure I'm dressed how I want because we're going to take photos and I'm going to post them. Whereas 20 years ago, it was like, come on, everybody, let's go to an orchard today. And we just went and we had fun and we were present and we were in the moment. And now we've put all this pressure on ourselves that like we're our own paparazzi, and we're living our life for what? And I say this sometimes to even my kids, but it's like just in general, and it probably comes across as kind of, I'll be honest, it's kind of harsh, it's kind of brass, but you know, put your phone down and get a life. Like if you are on the phone staring at what everybody else is doing all the time, you clearly have no life. Like get yourself so you don't have to live your life through other people's pictures. They're fake lives at that. I mean, it's just, it's gotten so far out there that even as grown adults, it's like you don't realize you're living on a movie screen. Like you can't even tell real from fake anymore. And I mean, going back to anxiety, it's like posting anxiety. I mean, even see, like, I actually have taken a huge break from social media this past summer. And I will say my number one reason, because a lot of people have kind of asked, like, you're not posting much, you're not doing this much. And I'm just like they're like, is everything okay? And I'm like, to be honest with you, I just haven't felt like it. I don't know what else more to say. I just haven't felt like it. And I really haven't felt like looking at what anybody else is. You can kind of take that and do whatever, but that's really the bottom line. I haven't felt like it. And I don't know. It's freeing, but I don't know. I mean, will I want to at some point? Because there's so much good stuff out there too. Yeah, I'm sure I will. But it's like, yes and no. Here's one thing. A friend and I, we were always talking about like the days of laying out at the beach with our magazines, you know, good old days. And actually, I just found a parents magazine from, so my oldest was born in 2002, and it was edition from 2002. That parents magazine, you know, with my old address on there. That thing was like an inch thick, just full goodness. Articles, really helpful stuff. I'm like, these were the good old days where we would read these articles, and it would take me, you know, weeks to get through it, but then the next one was coming in the mailbox. I'm like, oh, I just missed that. And I will say, I really, like, Instagram is my go-to. I know that when I post on Instagram, it automatically goes like on my Facebook page or something, but I'll be honest with you, I don't get on Facebook. I don't even really know how to work it anymore. But Instagram is my go-to. And I really do have people that I follow that feel like, I guess if you'll say, my magazine, like my articles, like what I'm interested in. And I think that is just part of being a grown-up, right? Of taking that responsibility in knowing what is good for me, what's healthy for me, and what's not. Like what is going to cause me this anxiety or feel like I'm less than or not enough. And that's just part of being mature. But I feel like, to be honest with you, I feel like social media has made mature adults kind of immature. I know I said it to be harsh, but I'm just speaking my mind, right?
No, I love it. Look, preach. So, you know, I think, So as you were talking, I was thinking about when I left the adult industry, right? Because I was in porn for 8 years.
Okay.
And I was a performer, and I was a director, and so, like, I was in the business. Yeah, I had award winning, right? Like I did it good. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do really good at it, right? So like I was fully participatory. And when I went on the Dr. Drew show, I thought it was going to be a really great marketing gimmick, right? It was a show about sex rehab, like sex addiction. I thought, oh,
I remember.
this will be so good for my marketability because I'll make it across like the national television, and I will be known for being a workaholic, right? Just like so much sex, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And then what happened is like I got onto the show and people started calling me Jennie.
Okay.
And nobody had called me Jennie, right? Like since I was 18, started creating this really curated for consumption identity. Everything was about penny flame, right? What will fans think of this? How does this show up? What if I am in this situation wearing this thing? Like, how would Penny Flame act in this situation, right? And the truth is that Penny Flame is a good time, right? She was great. She's cute. She's always going to be 26, which we love that for her, right? Like, that's the oldest Penny Flame ever gets. She never got Botox. She just lived, you know, and like they didn't have to worry about any of that. But I hit this point where I realized that I didn't have anything outside of that highly curated character. Everything existed in that. And it was hollow, right? Wow. And so when I left porn, I made this online declaration. I'm going to be becoming Jennie. I made my Instagram becoming Jennie. I wrote a blog becoming Jennie. Everything became about becoming the person that I want to be. Yeah. Right. And that person has difficult days. That person has highs and lows. That person takes shitty pictures. That person doesn't always look great. Right. That person also now has aged and has crow's feet, and she does tend to the deep 11s because our mother is prone to deep 11s, but that's fine, right? Like we can do a little maintenance. We're not going to shy away from that, right? But like Jennie, this person that I am, it isn't so curated, isn't so shined up that everything looks great.
You sound human to me.
Oh, it's so uncomfortable. Well, what I found is that the more that I would interact with social media, the more I felt the pull to assess for what, like, how's this going to read? How many likes is this going to get? Like, how's this going to be perceived? Like, is it going to do this? Is it going to do this? Like, oh, got to get on and do my comments. Got to do the surefire way to avoid that pull for me was to not go on social media. So I did very few posts for a long time, right? I stopped writing the blog at all. I really started to try to, like you said, like get a life, Jennie. Like let's just get a life, right? And now I find myself in this really precarious and curious position where social media is a vehicle to reach people, and I want to reach people about the book. I want people to know about my business. I want to be able to serve people who need anxiety treatment, right? And the way that happens now is in places like Instagram and Facebook. And even, God forbid, TikTok, right? Like, I don't want to be a TikTok therapist. And also, oh my God, do I have to be a TikTok therapist now, right? And so there's this tension there. And I initially started doing some of that curating again. Like, okay, like this is the angle. That's a better picture than this. This is better than this. Okay, well, how do they like this video? Like, is this? And then I found myself just sucked back into it. I finally said enough of this insanity. Like, I need to treat this like a business, which means that there are business hours around it. There's some task management here. This is not just an empty hole that I throw validation into and like look for validation and see, right? Like, this is a business decision. So I hired a marketing company and they're like, okay, send us 10 videos, send us this. And so I spend an afternoon and I do that, and then I send it to them and they manage it, right? And I'll get on and I'll like respond to stuff. And also, like, if that doesn't speak to the curated, right? Like, that is not my life out there. Right? Like, this is entertainment. And so what you were saying about like like social media making mature adults more mature, and then but also like adults who may have been like prone to immaturity just like more immature, right? Like I think that like if you are an adult with a prefrontal cortex that has the ability to recognize that this is entertainment, then you can usually hold a pretty good boundary,
Yeah.
right? But man, stuff gets in, right? Because I'll get on to answer a comment, and suddenly I'm doing like a compare and despair with some girls that I went to high school with who are living like fabulous lives, and I'm like, God, like I want to go there. I want to be on a boat,
Yeah.
right? Like, gosh, and she looks gorgeous too, right? Like, love what she's doing with her abs. Like, how, right? And then also like, okay, well, let's just. How about we get off of Instagram
Yeah.
and we just like hang with our kids? Or how about we like go for a walk, right? Like, how about we get our life and be in our life
No.
instead of despairing about the life that we think we should have
Yeah.
or that someone else has that's so much more glory. And that's just sort of what minds do.
Right.
They're very good. I've named mine Brenda. She is like extraordinary. But she's very good at like comparing and then telling me all the ways in which I have failed to like be my ultimate self, right? She wants me to optimize. And we're just gonna like thank you, Brenda. We're just gonna like continue living our lives.
Yeah, but it's so much. This has been a great conversation. It's given me so much to think about, though, and I hope that people that really do struggle with anxiety and just OCD feel relief for one that I like that you checked on the rigid thinking and like flexible thinking. I want everybody to think on that a little bit because I think that's really huge. Like how our rigid thinking plays into anxiety so much, and just by being flexible, that just seems lighter. And that's like I like that. I really liked that. That's one of my big takeaways. But any last thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's an important thing to note that like if you're getting swept into your smartphone, if you're getting bullied around by anxiety, it doesn't have to be like this, right? Like the phones are designed to pull you into them so that it happens. Yeah, that checks out, right? If you are looking at Instagram to catch up on people's lives instead of like reaching out, yeah, that's the easier thing to do, right? It isn't the thing that's going to fulfill you the most, but it's popcorn, right? Like it'll keep you full for a little bit, but we're gonna need some protein at some point, right? And so if you find yourself in that place, be gentle with yourself, right? Like you don't need to exacerbate judgment of you by judging yourself, right? Like this is just how brains work. They like shortcuts. We take easy ways. That's how evolution happens, right? Like it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the good enoughest. Yeah. And so, if you're suffering, there's also an easier way forward, right? And so whether it's with anxiety, whether it's with OCD, whether it's with a phone, whether it's with trauma, there's a way out, and life doesn't have to be just you and the hidey hole, right? Like you can lay in the field, you can smell the dandelions and eat them and feel the breeze on your face, even if we don't know if there's a bear in the woods that's about to eat us.
We'll get to that if it comes.
Yeah.
Right? No sense of laying there worrying about it. Well, it is like 85 and sunny out here today, and when you said that, I'm just like, oh, I need to go outside, and I've got these beautiful pink hydrangeas. Those just need to be cut and put in a vase in my kitchen. And I think about stuff like that. Like, it is worth noting that those are the things that bring us the most joy in life.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
I mean, really? If we ever stop to really ask ourselves, well, what would make me happy or bring me some joy, or what just feels good like right now? And it's those little moments that we can create all day, every day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's John Kabat-Zinn or Jack Cornfield who talks about those moments and says, that those little moments, they aren't so little. Like maybe they're not so little, right? And so yeah, it's lovely. Well, if anybody wants to buy the book, they can get it on Amazon. It's available there. And Jamie, you are a star. Thank you for having me on. I so
Thank you.
appreciate you.
I appreciate this too. It's been great. I hope my listeners got as much out of it, that I did. So I say that kind of selflessly.
Oh, no, I love it.
So thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Authentically Raw podcast. I really appreciate you. And it is my sincere hope that you get value out of each and every conversation. And I would love it if you could leave a review. It helps tremendously. Also, I'm a life coach, in case you didn't know. Visit my website at jamieberris.com to learn more. I would love to work with you, help you get through whatever it is you're going through, or help you get to wherever it is you're seeking to go. And also, one last thing, I have a life coachy kind of book. It's called Results Daily Planning and Self-Development. You can find it through my website or head straight over to Amazon. As always, I'm rooting for you. Be real, be raw, be authentic.